Hey, good afternoon, Air Force Association and the broader Aerospace Warfare Symposium. My name is Brigadier General David Gaedecke, and I'm proud to be here today with a couple of our industry partners to moderate a panel and talk about electromagnetic warfare. So first and foremost, I'd like to extend my thanks to AFA for really giving us an opportunity today to talk about this really important topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts, and that is electromagnetic warfare. So by way of introduction, as I said, my name is David Gaedecke, and I'm currently the Vice Commander at 16th Air Force. And so in that capacity, we are the parent numbered Air Force over the 55th Wing, which is fortunate to have the airborne's only airborne electronic attack capable aircraft, which is the EC-130 Compass Call. And additionally, we also have the RC-135 fleet. So clearly EW is in our portfolio. But also as 16th Air Force, we are the Air Force's information warfare numbered Air Force. And in this capacity, we also have the responsibility for ISR, cyber, information operations, weather, and of course, as I said, electromagnetic warfare. In addition, I come to you from my previous positions as where I was able to lead the Air Force's electromagnetic spectrum, electromagnetic warfare, enterprise capability collaboration team. So it was chartered by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, where we went to look at our ability to maintain and advance electromagnetic spectrum superiority. And out of that, I was able to, in my last job before I came to 16th Air Force, I was the Director of Electromagnetic Spectrum Superiority on the Pentagon. But joined here with me today are two industry partners. So AFA asked us to do something a little bit different this time. And that was where we would have a discussion with me as the military member being the moderator to work with two of our partners in industry. We recognize, and AFA recognizes how important that relationship is. And so today we're going to really just have a discussion about electromagnetic warfare. We do have the chat window open, so if you're able to pass any questions in chat, then we'll be able to see those, and I'll be happy to address those questions with our team here today. But first and foremost, I'd like to introduce each of our members, and I'll turn the microphone over to them so they can tell you a little bit about themselves. So our two members are Mr. Scott Evers and Mr. Dave Robbins. And so I will first turn it over to Scott Evers to introduce himself. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, General Gaedecke. Again, I'm Scott Evers, Vice President at Elbit America here for the Survivability and Special Programs. Been an AFA life member since 1983, proudly, and appreciate the advocacy that AFA provides for the war, and of course for your services, General Gaedecke. Over to you, Dave.
Okay, thanks. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, General Gaedecke, for your service to the nation over quite a number of years, and also offer Leidos congratulations for your recent promotion. So glad to hear about that. So I'm Dave Robbins, Senior VP and Chief Technology Officer for the Leidos Innovation Center. Leidos is a $12 billion a year defense contractor, and I work with a team of about 1,000 people that support R&D efforts over a pretty broad spectrum of technical areas, principally electronic warfare, but also artificial intelligence, machine learning, IR countermeasures, air surveillance, airborne autonomy, and then space IR tracking payloads and directed energy. So we work for the Air Force, including AFRL. We also work for DoD research components like DARPA, ONR, DIA, et cetera. So I also, until recently, when we had the zero baseline review of the DoD advisory committees, I was a member of the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board and hope to be back on that if and when it's reconstituted. So let me pass it back to you, General.
Well, thanks, gentlemen. I appreciate you telling us a little bit about your backgrounds. I think that'll provide an opportunity for people to address any of their questions specifically, if they do for each of directly at one of you, or if it's for the broader crowd. Before I ask you any questions, I would like to give each of you an opportunity to do any kind of an opening comments and introduction, or anything that you would like to talk about the nature of our panel today. Personally, one of the things that I'll share with you is that one of the challenges when I first took the electromagnetic spectrum, electromagnetic warfare, ECCT, was scope. And I think that that's one of the most, the vastness of the electromagnetic spectrum, and how electromagnetic warfare is a critical part of that as we conduct the business of EW within the electromagnetic spectrum. But that might be a way to think of any of your opening comments or anything that you would want to offer. But Scott, I'll give you the chance first.
Thanks. Very interesting topic, and of course, a lot more highlighted here in recent months. A lot more focus on electromagnetic spectrum, and not just EW. Much broader perspective there. Elbit America, about $1.5 billion here in the U.S. across border patrol, land, airborne. I'm a part of our airborne business unit primarily. And within that, having survivability, we have ECM, RWR solutions, laser warning, missile warning, IRCM, a whole broad range here to bring to those solutions, and good depth here in the U.S. with our engineering staff. A lot of IRAD that we put to new solutions. Typically across Elbit, 8 to 9% goes back into new solutions. Very much a technology company. Look forward to the discussion. Thanks. Over.
Hey, thank you for that and for a good explanation there. Dave, do you have any opening comments that you'd like to offer us today?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I think there's a lot of concern within the Air Force today about electromagnetic superiority. And this has been expressed by the chief, CQ Brown, in his asleep at the wheel comments, which are really focusing us today. So we need to look at what we do moving forward to enhance our position and ensure that we have superiority. Our foes are changing. We're moving from a counterterrorism sort of point of view and competition to a near peer competition. And our foes are now building and fielding their capabilities in EMS, and we have to lead them. We have to be in front of them. We can't be playing catch up with them. And we never want to get to a point where they feel bold enough to engage us in armed conflict. We have to make it too costly for them to do that and convince them that any attempt to do so is likely to be met in immediate failure. So I like to think in terms of what we in industry and the Air Force can do to improve our strength and dominance in EMS. And I have just a few thoughts I'd like to share to get us going here. We're seeing more and more agile threats in the field, and clearly we need systems, EW systems, that are software defined and agile so that we can defeat those threats, and we can even postulate other threats and be ready to defeat them when we see them. The threat systems are software defined and reprogrammable, and we have to be more agile than they are. One way to get there, I think, is to develop systems with modular open architectures using standards like MOSA, and ensure that the government has government purpose rights for the hardware software interfaces and the tech baseline. And that can enable new algorithms and advanced hardware technology to be used across multiple services, not just the Air Force, and multiple platforms. I think we see currently that each service has its own solutions, and even in cases, each platform can have its own solutions. So I'm thinking more of an app store-like environment where we can do rapid capability upgrades to provide better EW algorithms, faster reprogramming, and defeat the latest threats. We've seen this in commercial industry with the PC x86 architecture, ARM processor architectures. You can have different operating systems working on the same architecture, the same hardware, and you can have a single operating system across multiple hardware generations, and even different operating systems operating on the same hardware. So it's clearly possible to do this. And what makes this happen, what makes it practical, is having interface definitions that are locked down, and that can make a system open and evolvable, both from a hardware point of view and a software point of view. And if you apply this to EW systems, we think we can see a much more competitive landscape that avoids vendor lock and stovepiping. But this requires a community-wide engagement and standards committee in place to oversee this and enforce the standards. So that, I think, is a key issue. We'd like to see, I think, commonality of EW systems across platforms and services. We gain economies of scale from that, and also reduce acquisition and lifecycle cost. Modular open architecture would support that. And then further multifunction systems that support multiple EMS applications, comms, EW, radar, nav, et cetera, through a single aperture, a common aperture, providing very broad bandwidth to cover all the different parts of the spectrum that we need to be aware of, and then common hardware that allows us to secure EMS dominance and reduce lifecycle costs and swap in these systems. So that's my introduction. Thanks.
Well, there's a lot there, a lot for us to talk about, and appreciate that. And I'm encouraged by a lot of what you said and what you're thinking about from your position. You know, one of the things that really caught my interest was something that we found, we in the government, and particularly in the Department of the Air Force, as we were looking at software-defined capabilities. And, you know, for us to do that, to be able to take advantage also of existing hardware, and then how do you make the existing hardware that we have relevant using software-defined capabilities? One of those ways I think that we saw that was really from our, you know, ability to focus on that, much like you talked about from an app perspective. And so, Dave, I'll ask you first. You know, one of the concerns is I was part of the ECCT, and I made my rounds to talk to a number of different industry partners, is that I was concerned about the ability for industry to remain profitable if we pursue some of these software-defined capabilities. And I bring that up in particular because, you know, we know it's a partnership, but we also understand that this is a business, and that many of the, you know, large corporations make their own investment. So do you think there's a ability to remain profitable from a software-defined perspective? Over.
Well, I think mileage varies a lot there. Certainly, having a more open environment makes it difficult for the very largest competitors there, but it also opens up the tent to a lot of different participants, and I think it can provide better capabilities for the government, and also lower costs overall. And you know, there are a lot of ways to expand what we can do. I think we can get greater capabilities, more functionality, and enable you know, a broader participation, and still keep the larger industries investing and moving forward on that. But it's a big trend in commercial business, you know, to have these open architectures. And we're seeing a push towards commercial solutions in other areas, like space, for example, where the government's looking to commercial launch capabilities, commercial buses, et cetera, and expanding in that way. So I think we can get a lot more participants. It's going to be some change, certainly, but I think it all involves goodness for the Air Force and for the rest of the DoD.
Thanks for that, Dave. And it is a good perspective. And like I said, I think that I learned from my team and I as we went around and we visited so many industry partners as we were trying to better understand what America's defense industry had for electromagnetic warfare. And so it was one of those things that I listened, it became very clear to me that the relationship that we had and how important it was between the government and between industry. So Scott, I wanted to ask you kind of a related question to kind of growing off of Dave's comments, that what he kind of alluded to is that today's combat aircraft utilize mostly kind of a platform specific and federated EW solutions. And then, as we go forward, do you envision that future EW upgrades and new systems can really embrace that integrated and or modular approach? Dave talked about the open architecture. I think that's a relation, and welcome your thoughts on that. Over.
It's a real problem right now. There's a lot of disparate systems and solutions across platforms, and two specific areas. A lot of wasted investment, the focus platform by platform. Wherever we can combine those across the services, not just Air Force, but all, but especially within the Air Force, and bring those new capabilities together. Yes, modular, open system eventually, but at least centered within acquisition office within the Air Force. That would help bring capabilities that might have been invested on one platform over to another platform. Yes, some of them are platform specific, but a lot of them can benefit across the platforms. That's got to be one of the key first steps, is to bring those together. We see too much of that siloed and like I said, disparate. There's a lot of good capability out there, still some to be developed. We probably haven't invested enough in new capabilities, and I believe that's what we're referencing, General Brown and others. We've invested a lot to get systems on airplanes. We still don't have the quantity or the quality needed, and by a common acquisition area, we can really benefit across the platforms. So I think all of industry would appreciate that, and we can all benefit from that. There's business to be made with these solutions, even in more common hardware and software defined, because it's an ever evolving technology. And of course, the need to be responsive to new threats out there in industry, in theater, and then respond to those as quickly as possible. So a lot still to evolve and to benefit into the network with all of this input. Over.
Yeah, that's good. Really appreciate that perspective, and I think again a lot of shared thoughts from what we learned as we went around. I think that one of those comments, and I think you referenced in your opening as well, is with General Brown's comments most recently, and where we are regarding our capability over the number of the years, and how do we continue to grow that capability based on the nature of the conflicts that we've been involved in over the last few years, and now that we've focused as a national defense strategy, national security strategy has told us to a great power competition. So Dave, I was going to ask you, kind of building on that, is when we talk about our commercial industrial base, do you think that we have the capacity and sufficient production of processors and other critical capabilities, critical electronics are out there. Do you think that base exists for us right now to continue to accelerate our capabilities as we know we need to do?
Well, that's a challenge right now. We're seeing that even as we speak in the auto industry, where they're drawing on supply chains that span the world and are unable to get the parts they need to produce new autos. So that's a challenge there, and I think it's one that we can see in our business as well. One of the big concerns is over the years, there's been an erosion of our ability to manufacture advanced semiconductors, such as processors, within US-owned trusted facilities. And it's expensive to maintain that separate production capability. And so today we rely a lot on international vendors, sometimes producing hardware within our country and sometimes outside. But I think what we need to do is to ensure that we have trusted supplies is maybe focus more on technology advances that enable us to trust our sources. So what can we do kind of in a zero trust sort of environment? What can we apply onto that process or the software around it that ensures that regardless of what's in it, we can continue to operate? So there's a lot of interest in that today, I think, and moving forward. So that's pretty exciting. I think getting back to some of the previous remarks, in today's commercial industry, cell phones, computers, we still have a lot of big vendors doing very well, but the interesting thing is there are a lot of small ones doing well too, and people with good ideas have access to customers today, and I think that would be important for electronic warfare as well. Over.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. You know something else. Both of you have talked, and when I before this, and I was reading about both of your looking at both of your experience and history as well as your current portfolios. And one of the things that I've found interesting, especially as I've joined 16th Air Force, is that, and this actually is somewhat of a question that we received online here, is that when you look at the different mission areas that we have, when you look at, for an example, for 16th Air Force, where I say we are the information warfare NAV, and we're bringing together the mission sets of ISR and cyber and electromagnetic warfare and information operations and unique weather capabilities. And we're bringing those different mission areas and able to focus them and converge them on a problem. We've become very problem-centric to bring all those capabilities from the number of organizations that we have subordinate to 16th Air Force to focus on global problems and global outcomes, all of those different things. But when I look at the way that we establish requirements in the United States Air Force and the way that we then create formal requirements that go to industry, do you feel that our requirements are matching our narrative, or do you think that we need to kind of focus and readdress that to look more holistically? And perhaps more importantly, is industry ready for those types of requirements, or are you also somewhat focused on individual mission areas or platforms? And I'll throw that as an open question to whichever one of you wants to jump on that one first. Thanks.
I'll talk a little bit to it, if that's okay, Dave.
Sure.
Yeah, in General Gaedecke. I mentioned it earlier. Right now we have a lot of individual platform acquisitions, developments and acquisitions. Granted, they're generated from mission requirements, but they don't congeal together. So much of it is tailored very specific, and you end up with requirements guys in one office, one platform, one mission area, and they have their constraints, their budgets, and their timelines to get things out. And it just doesn't come back together, or they don't have access to of what those capabilities could be or are available from other platforms. So again, I'm coming back to the push. If we can bring those all together above and outside of a platform-focused acquisition office, then we can look at it. Dave mentioned it earlier, a common aperture, a single aperture that can bring so much of this together. It's doable. The science is unachievable. It's out there. It's available. The processing power is caught up with that. We're talking now about a lot smaller, even on the RF side, to bring all of this together. So, being able to bring those together outside of the traditional acquisition is important. And we don't currently operate that way, at least not on the requirement side. Within industry, we try to do that before investment. We look for ways to bridge the gap. Although with secure programs, it can be difficult to do. Each one has its own controls and approvals, their own ETOs. So very difficult to do on the industry side with the current structure. Over.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big problem well, there are a couple big problems with requirements. Clearly, they're unique to services and platforms, and that makes it hard to get economies of scale and common hardware out there. I think if we had a broader oversight committee for EW that could push for common solutions that could be built out to different levels. I mean, we don't have to have every capability on every aircraft, but if we define the interfaces such that you can add more capability and scale as requirements increase, I think that's good. So I think developing functional requirements as opposed to specific hardware requirements is a step in that direction. But the other big problem I see is with speed. And the DoD 5000 program of record system really doesn't provide the speed that we need. And we're seeing some changes today as we move more towards acquisition through OTAs, where we can do prototypes and testing quickly and then move right to production as necessary. And I think we need to do more of that. We need to do more in terms of rapid prototyping and agile secure development to help speed getting the technology that exists in industry out into the fight. Over.
Yeah, great inputs from both of you. And I do appreciate the agile approach that you talk about, Dave. I know that, as we've been working in some of the programs I worked in before when I was in the Pentagon related to our cyber portfolio and the ability to rapidly change and adjust versus a big requirement that sometimes can take a longer time to get satisfied. And with Moore's Law and everything else, we've got to be able to work. We've got to be able to work much more rapidly. So appreciate that perspective. The other thing I think that both of you kind of alluded to, kind of building off of what each of you asked, and then what someone in the chat asked, is one of the things I found in the United States Air Force when we looked at who was responsible for electromagnetic warfare and electromagnetic spectrum capabilities, is that it wasn't resident in one office. And the challenge of that, much like even in each of your individual programs, we found that from a program executive officer, from that lead in their portfolios, that then again lashes up with industry in the acquisition business, we found that so many different PEOs were responsible for different pieces. Even when you look at, you have a fighter bomber PEO, and you have a different PEO in the Air Force that manages, let's say, the compass call, and then you even have a different PEO that manages pods and other systems. So so we tried to determine whether or not we needed to have a specific PEO for electromagnetic warfare and electromagnetic spectrum. But as you all know, it's exceptionally broad when you do that. But we kind of resemble each other between the Air Force and industry in that regard. So what are your thoughts on that, of having someone that's specific to those capabilities, regardless of what platform that they're on? Over.
Well, I like that a lot. I wonder if it's a single person or a committee that would do that, and whether it should be at the Air Force level or perhaps even higher. But we need to maintain some commonality across the different platforms. I think, as Scott said, the technology is there to do this. We have exceptionally broad sampling capabilities in the RF that we can use to cover very broad parts, if not the entire spectrum of interest. And, that we should use to our advantage, and develop systems that can be applied to a lot of different platforms. And I think it's within our grasp. So yes, I think having someone in charge, and preferably a team in charge, would be a step in the right direction. Over.
Yeah, and if I could add to it, in my comments earlier, I kind of said even requirements is not set up. F and ACC have both taken the first steps by setting up separate EMS divisions or branches. But the requirement side is heading that direction of bringing it all together in a solution. So we need something on the acquisition side. Again, whether it's a committee, a steering committee over some of the functions, or a cross-functional team, but it's got to bring those together, EOs across the platforms. If it's not a separate EMS type PEO, there's got to be something, a glue to bring those together. Again, a lot of money is being spent. It's just not being spent efficiently to bring together the quantity and quality that is possible for our warfighters. Over.
Yeah, I think that's good, and it's appreciate your views on that as well, since it is something that we saw, and sometimes it makes sense, right? That you would model, that industry would model after us, and so I always wondered if we could create that focal point that in acquisition, then it would help industry and help us as to partner. And in that same vein, that's what we're looking at for information warfare is, how do we bring that together to bring all those capabilities, to bring all the capabilities we can to do and operate in the information environment. For many of the reasons, actually, Dave kind of said it too, which was with competition, it's because of where we are. From our perspective at 16th Air Force, when you look across the continuum of conflict, from when you look at it from competition into crisis and into armed conflict, we should do we want to stay, we want to be in charge of where you are on that continuum. And I think that the capabilities we talk about could be absolutely relevant in competition, in crisis, and in armed conflict. And I think that sometimes we just need to, it's how we frame and how we look at those things in order to be successful as we go forward. So, we've talked about a number of things already today. And one thing we've kind of talked about, but I wanted to get your thoughts on is and I said it in my opening, but I would like more specific from, if either of you have any thoughts on how do you scope it? I mean, Dave, even if you look at your portfolio of what Link does with a broad sense, and also Scott with your portfolio as well, is that where do you define electromagnetic warfare when we talk about the EMS? because we all know that when we absolutely dominated the electromagnetic spectrum, and when you look at the history of when we were able to do that, and then what I would say is a focus on operations in the Middle East and counter violent extremism, that we didn't focus on some of those high-end capabilities to the same extent. But during that time, technology really started to use up so much more of the spectrum. So where do you bound, how do you bound and how do you scope what you would consider electromagnetic warfare across the electromagnetic spectrum? Is it, in other words, does that force us into individual programs versus having a PEO for EMS, which might be everything's in the EMS?
Well, I like the idea of everything in the EMS. You know, years ago, it was much more difficult to sample at the rates needed to cover much of the spectrum. And today we can, you know, it's practical to sample from 0 to 40 gigahertz or more in a single system. Now, that's essentially your field of regard. Your processing bandwidth is going to be much smaller. But if you have that type of a system out there, you can look at a lot all at the same time. Depends on how much processing you have to look at individual signals of interest and so on. So I think the technology's there to cover a lot of that. You're not going to get up into the you know, EO world with that sort of approach. But I think the technology's there, so we can do that. We can, and if we're doing it all together, we have a better opportunity to manage it together. So we can make sure that our comms aren't interfering with our radar or our EW, et cetera. And if we can manage all of that under a single umbrella with individual systems that have broad coverage, I think we have a better chance of success than working pieces and parts. Over.
Yeah, Dave, and I could add to that. You know, we're mired in tradition right now with a lot of federated solutions, at least on most of the platforms. Yes, we're doing integrated on some platforms, but not enough. We still look for separate RWR updates, separate jammer updates, E-Link comment, completely different area. You know, first step is going to be to bring those together within a platform in an integrated suite so that they can properly integrate, you know, as Dave said, so they're not stepping on each other. You know, we've got blankers to do that, but that's a whole nother box. Why not do it all in an integrated suite? Yes, everybody sees that as expensive because now you're talking about one big system, but in the long run, if you plan for it and it's integrated and you've got somebody managing, then at some point first integrated and then really bringing in the full EM spectrum, now you've at least got a starting point with an integrated suite of hardware and algorithms to base it on, and then broaden that spectrum, bringing in other apertures, other bands that traditionally you wouldn't work together, but now you can. You know, we both said it. The science is there. The hardware is capable. If we look at it from an integrated perspective. Over.
I think you make a really good point, Scott. And having systems that cover very broad bandwidths gives you the potential to scale. You can add new capabilities. You can also address situations where threats move into areas of the spectrum that we haven't historically looked at. And if we have the ability to look at all those, a relatively modest upgrade to a system could cover signals of interest in areas of the spectrum we just haven't paid attention to. I think you make a great point.
Yeah, I really liked what both of you said, but it brought one thing to mind, especially while I was listening to Scott, and that was, for me, I started to think about data. It's how do we mass all of that data? And then anytime we talk about data, it immediately brings into, and And Scott started talking about, the algorithms and the analytics. So as soon as you say those things, now I start thinking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. Both of you are smiling, both of you are nodding. So, I mean, this is another thing, and that's where I'm finding all of these things are so interrelated, and that's why I don't want to put, the chicken or the egg, but at the same time, when I look at all of these things, that they're all interrelated. So I guess my question on that to both of you is, what are your thoughts on the role of AI and ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning? Of course, we cannot ignore data in that. What are the roles of that in electronic warfare? And Dave, I'll start with you first.
Okay, thank you. That's a great area. So trusted and explainable AI and machine learning can help you in real time identify novel threats, ones you haven't seen before, and the potential's there to generate countermeasures on the fly. And so AI and machine learning can play a big role there. And you can train these systems if you have the right kind of threat simulators. So you need to be able to accurately simulate what's out there today and be able to postulate what may be out there tomorrow, what our foes can do, and test the systems against that. But one of the key things is having systems that are trusted, that pilots will believe in and take action on. And so there's an important part of this is the human and AI machine learning collaboration part of things, so that they can be working together and each partner can take advantage of the other. So the human partner has to trust the AI when that's the best course of action, but there's a lot of intuition and understanding that pilots and EW operators gain, and they need to have a role in there too. So it's important for these systems to work together, to get confidence in each other, and show that things work. Getting to your idea of data, there's a lot that AI and machine learning can do to automate the processing of data. We've seen that ourselves. Currently, many platforms can collect huge amounts of data while they're accomplishing a mission, and that could potentially be used after the mission to understand how the threat environment is changing. But right now, there's just way too much data available to process that manually. So this is an area where artificial intelligence and machine learning are needed and can pull the weed out of the chaff there and focus on the signals that are interesting and highlight them to the human in the loop that's trying to do reprogramming or functions like that. Over.
Yeah, Dave, well said, exactly right. We're going from federated systems, alerting a pilot, showing some basic information, to integrated systems that can now correlate and provide more data to the pilot. As you bring more together, and especially as you broaden across the spectrum, and we get more into the near peer environment, there's too much for the pilot to do. It's an enabler. AI, ML, it's an enabler. You just get all of this into the system, let alone the cockpit, but now sharing on the network, there's just too much information. It's got to be processed and presented such that here's the relevant information, here's something to act on, and share and correlate across the nodes, because it's just, it's the Hoover, right? You got all that information coming in. You've got to be able to deal with it up front, and not just at the end after it's been downloaded or shared across the network. You've got to get more of that done up front. Otherwise, it's just too much and it's too late. So agreed. Good point, Dave and General. Thank you.
To add on to your comments there, I think you can take it to another level. We're getting to the point where we're looking at collaborative teaming across aircraft, including unmanned aircraft. And so how do you deal? It's hard enough for a pilot to deal with his own aircraft and the signals he's encountering, but what about other aircraft, unmanned aircraft, it's hard for him to maintain control over that. And so AI and machine learning can play a role in that. And then you have to realize there's a lot of advantages that we can get from working manned, unmanned teaming and having spatially separated aircraft. I mean, there's so much more you can do in the electronic warfare regime if you have the spatial diversity of assets working together collaboratively. So I think that's, you know, another step for AI and machine learning to help us in the fight. Over.
Absolutely. It is. I think that, you know, both of your points kind of nest pretty well with when you think about what General Brown, as Chief Staff of the Air Force, had talked about, and you know how we need to refocus. And I think that when you talk about, so what can we do? You know, if you say, you know, the quote that I think Scott had said it about asleep at the wheel, how will then the United States Air Force and industry address the issue? You know, what are the technologies and capabilities the Air Force can pursue to improve our EW posture? When I think about that, I think that AI, ML, and you know, and using the power of data are examples. Do either of you think of, or does anything else come to mind of either other technologies or other partnerships or other things that industry and the United States Air Force, the Department of the Air Force, can do as to pursue those advanced capabilities? Over.
I'll touch on that for a sec. We're in a unique position here at Elbit America. We're under a special security agreement whose sole purpose is to leverage allies' capabilities into the U.S. warfighter. And in our case, we can leverage into our U.S. engineering solutions that have already been developed, paid for by our ally in Israel, and in many cases fielded. And we can bring them to the U.S., give us a nice step forward, and have then, you know, through our engineering staff, turn it into a U.S. solution that's now unique and tailored to the U.S. Needs. So leveraging our allies' capabilities in a time where we haven't invested in advancing in some areas, because yes, we've talked about integrating, we've talked about you know, full spectrum and AI and ML, but there are other features within existing capabilities and solutions that we don't have yet here in the U.S. that we can take advantage of. So getting them into the U.S. labs, getting them evaluated, and taking advantage of that quickly, and not burdening it with the normal bureaucracy in this time where, again, all the focus is on advancing our EM spectrum capability. We've got to find ways to not only coordinate across the missions, across the platforms, but get it done quickly. You know, I mentioned it earlier, we lack the quantity as well as the quality across the operational platforms. A lot of them are just about uncovered out there, and that's and disappointing, and we shouldn't have it that way. Over.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're arguing one of the points we brought up before is that we need the best and brightest to be working these problems, whether they're you know, in the U.S. or whether they're allies, whether they're large businesses or small businesses, typical defense contractors, or you know, small or large commercial firms. We need to bring the best and brightest, the best athletes to work together on the challenges we have. And so I agree with you entirely there. I think we need the larger tent, and that's with more participants, and that is brought to us by having more open systems and publishing those open system standards so that lots of different people can contribute to these systems, add in capabilities to make our systems better. So I agree with that 100%. Over.
Yeah, there are great comments there too. And Scott, I really appreciate that you brought up the importance of our foreign partners and allies. It is something that we are always considering is how do we leverage, and it is, I mean, you brought up the foreign partners piece, which is incredibly important, but also, again, other services is the other part of what I think about in this, because sometimes I found is that, you know, even across industry, that individual, even companies might be developing something for one service, not entirely aware of that someone else is developing similar technologies for the other service. And so I do think that there is opportunity for all of us to continue to work together. And again, as I think that I've had tangible examples of some of our closest partners that have incredible technologies that we know that are out there, and it's how do we do that so that we kind of have each other's back and we're not leveraging, you know, that we can leverage each other's capabilities because of being great partners. So we have about, I think we're getting about 10 minutes left. So I do want to give you each a chance to close, but I wanted to just ask one more question. Because I'll start it with you, Dave, and because you kind of made a comment about it's kind of related, and that is, do commercial products and technology have a role here? Does it have to be, you know, where do you see is there, it's not quite off the shelf. There was a time where that was, you know, especially in our counterterrorism, counter-violent extremist missions that we had, it was easier to use the kind of commercial off-the-shelf technologies. Do you still think that that's viable today for today's electromagnetic warfare portfolio and capabilities? Over.
Yeah, I think it's essential. You know, the investment in commercial business is a big multiplier. You know, particularly R&D. I think it's 10 to 100 times greater than the investment that goes on in DoD and industry supporting DoD. So there's a lot happening there, and where there are dual use capabilities, those in particular, we need to draw in. So processors, for example, the DoD and government in general will never surpass the technology that is available in industry today for processors, GPUs, FPGAs, et cetera. They are really pushing the advances, and they're pushed for commercial applications. But again, many of them are dual purpose kind of applications that will help. And I think there's more out there. If we open things up and provide the kind of open systems that exist in some of these commercial products where you can easily upgrade them either via software or hardware add-ons, I think that bodes well for the EMS business as well. So you're not going to be able to get everything you need, that's for sure, but there's much to draw upon that's out there today, I think, and more in the future. Over.
Yeah, I'll say it. Not so much cup is half empty, but it's a challenge. The military aircraft environment is very harsh. The reliability that we need is extremely harsh. A lot of commercial stuff is disposable and just not always applicable to our environment. We look for it, we try to leverage it, but it is a huge challenge. So we're constantly looking for the militarized version to be able to put into the kind of environments that we need, where they don't currently meet the, especially environmental requirements, but also as we get into more cyber AT and trusted sources, it's just really an ongoing challenge, probably more so today than in past. COTS is a great buzzword. There's more to it. And there's applications maybe in other platforms, but getting into the military aircraft is a challenge. So going forward, again, what we need to leverage is common requirements and common solutions, especially in the EM spectrum. It's just really difficult with the security environment to be able to get permission to share from one program to another. And that is an ongoing challenge. If we can get this up to at least within one service, multi-services would be great, so that we can have a clearinghouse and be able to share these and share labs, share environments. I can't do a computer environment for multiple programs. I can't do a lab and have it certified across multiple programs easily. We have to get permission from all of them. It's a burden on industry right now because of the tight security requirements. So I've jumped from COTS to security requirements. It's tied together, but we need to be able to make it easier, again, for us to invest properly in the right areas. Over.
Yeah, thanks for both of your comments there as well. Well, gentlemen, I think we've got about 6 minutes left, and then I think they'll pull the plug on us. But I do want to give you each an opportunity for a couple minutes, if you have anything that you'd like to close with today for our audience out there. Dave, I'll let you go first.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, just to echo what Scott said, security is a huge hindrance for us today, and particularly with the COVID situation, it's hard to get systems approved through the system, through the various security wickets we have to, and communication for classified applications is very difficult. We ran into some significant roadblocks with the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board in that area. There just is no place you can go to get access to the secure systems we need to communicate. So good point there. So I guess one closing remark that's a little bit out of the box is I think going forward, one thing that's going to be crucial to EW technology development going forward is to get a workforce built from the people that are in our grade schools and high schools now. And I think we, as an industry, as the Air Force, have to encourage STEM and get students thinking about careers in technology and even electronic warfare. One of the visits we did in the Scientific Advisory Board a couple years ago was to see what they're doing at Hill Air Force Base with maintaining F-35s. And they know how many are coming online in the future. And they're working actively today to try to get students, interns, a whole range of people spread out over time, filling in to be able to maintain these advanced aircraft. And the same is going to be true with EW. We need more brighter people, and we need to focus on getting our message out into the high schools, supporting STEM activities there as leaders in industry and in the Air Force. I think that's really important. We need to show our students that they can have outstanding careers in and rewarding careers in electronic warfare, SIGINT, and other areas. So providing internships for those students is a good thing. Getting them cleared while they're still in high school to get over some of those challenges with getting a cleared workforce in place. Those are things we can all do. And then when we've got the people in our workforces, work to upskill them, help them get graduate degrees, help them do online training in areas like artificial intelligence and machine learning, where it's a very challenged environment. So that's my parting thought. Over.
Great, thanks, Dave. Scott.
Yeah, good points, Dave. Thank you. Look, it is very pleasing to see that we've recognized, at least in the Air Force, the challenges that upon ourselves by not investing in new capabilities and addressing the EM spectrum overall. So it's an exciting time for us that are in the survivability, intel gathering, data gathering business see that we've got this renewed focus, and the new technologies that need to happen. As Dave said, we need the skill set, but we also need the acquisition side to line up with it, to share that commonality across the solutions. And we need the bureaucracy, especially on the security side, updated to be able to allow us to address this in a more common fashion across missions, across platforms, and across the services. Exciting time for us to be involved in this. Thank you for your time today. Over.
Well, thanks, gentlemen, and thanks, AFA, for the opportunity to talk about electromagnetic warfare today. Really interesting. Appreciate your time. And I think we hit our TOT. So thanks again. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And I think we are out here. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.